It didn't happen in public. There were no cameras, no ceremonies, no warnings. Behind closed palace doors, a vote was quietly taken, one that would permanently alter the balance of power inside the monarchy. When the decision was finalized, even seasoned insiders struggled to believe it. A crown had been symbolically removed, a title stripped away, and a woman once called queen was suddenly something else entirely. This was not tradition, it was rupture. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. What unfolded inside the palace that day was not a routine procedural meeting, but an emergency gathering shaped by urgency, fear, and an unspoken understanding that the monarchy stood at a dangerous crossroads. Senior figures were summoned with little notice, offered no public explanation, and instructed that discretion was no longer optional, it was mandatory. The absence of ceremony was deliberate. There would be no photographs, no formal agenda circulated in advance, no comforting language to soften what was about to take place. From the moment the doors closed, it was clear this was not about preserving appearances. It was about containment. Courtiers who had served through decades of royal turbulence sensed immediately that something had shifted. The atmosphere was heavy, almost claustrophobic, as if history itself was holding its breath. The shock did not come from the existence of the vote, but from its subject. A title already acknowledged, already spoken aloud to the nation, was now being questioned as though it had never been fully secure. For some in the room, disbelief quickly gave way to quiet dread. For others, there was a cold acceptance, the kind that comes when a long, simmering conflict finally reaches its boiling point. As arguments were framed and countered, it became evident that this decision was not born overnight. It carried the weight of unresolved tensions, private grievances, and emotional fault lines that had been ignored for far too long. When the moment arrived and the vote was formally cast, there was no dramatic declaration, only the subtle realization that something irreversible had just occurred. What made the outcome even more unsettling was the lack of unity. This was not a unanimous act of confidence or clarity. Early signs of division were impossible to miss. Faces betrayed hesitation. Silences spoke louder than words. Some votes were cast with visible reluctance, others with grim resolve. Beneath the formal language lay something deeply personal: relationships strained, loyalties tested, and a growing belief that the cost of inaction had become greater than the cost of upheaval. The emotional gravity of removing a title already woven into public consciousness settled over the room like a shadow, reminding everyone present that no explanation, however carefully crafted, could ever fully undo what had just been done. And yet, even as the meeting concluded, there was no sense of closure. Instead, there was a shared, unsettling awareness that this vote was not an ending, but a beginning. A line had been crossed. Precedent had been set. The monarchy, long defined by continuity and restraint, had taken a step into uncertain territory, one that would demand further reckonings, deeper revelations, and consequences no one could yet fully measure. To understand how such an unthinkable vote could even occur, we must go back to the tension that had been quietly building for months long before the council doors ever closed. Camilla's rise to the title of queen was never smooth. It was negotiated, tolerated, and conditionally accepted. Behind the smiles and formal acknowledgements lay unresolved resentment, unspoken rules, and promises that were never written down. What the public saw as a settled matter was, inside the palace, a fragile arrangement held together by silence. And when silence breaks, it doesn't whisper, it detonates. From the very beginning, Camilla's elevation rested on compromises so delicate they were never allowed to exist on paper. Every nod of approval came with an invisible asterisk, every public endorsement shadowed by private caveats. Support was offered, but rarely without hesitation. Acceptance was voiced, but seldom without limits. Inside the palace, there was a quiet understanding that this title came with conditions shaped by history, memory, and wounds that had never fully healed. What the outside world interpreted as closure was, in truth, a temporary ceasefire. Disagreements simmered beneath the surface, not just about Camilla herself, but about what the title of queen truly meant in a modern monarchy already strained by public scrutiny. For some, the title was symbolic and flexible. For others, it carried an emotional weight that could not be rewritten through announcements or carefully chosen words. These divisions were rarely expressed openly, but they influenced every discussion, every briefing, every moment of hesitation that followed Camilla's rise. Over time, the discomfort became harder to disguise. Advisors spoke cautiously. Senior figures measured their words. Silence became the preferred language of dissent. There were signs, subtle at first, that her position was never as secure as it appeared. Invitations shifted. Conversations stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Decisions were delayed without explanation. None of these moments were dramatic on their own, but together they formed a pattern, one that suggested tolerance rather than trust. Camilla felt it, even if no one dared to say it aloud. The isolation crept in slowly, disguised as formality, masked by protocol. She was present, but not always included. A queen in title, yet increasingly alone in practice. Behind closed doors, the emotional cost mounted. The burden of carrying a crown that some believed should never have existed weighed heavily, creating an unspoken distance between Camilla and the institution she had fought so long to be part of. Loyalty, once assumed, now felt conditional. Support, once promised, now seemed negotiable. The palace did not erupt in conflict, it withdrew. And that withdrawal spoke volumes. It was a reminder that acceptance had limits, and those limits were never clearly defined. What made this fragility so dangerous was its invisibility, because as long as the arrangement held, it could be presented as stability. But stability built on silence is never permanent. It only waits. And as tensions continued to accumulate, the reality became impossible to ignore. Camilla's crown had always been provisional. Her position dependent not on tradition, but on restraint. But private discomfort alone doesn't strip a crown. Something far more destabilizing had begun to unfold inside the palace walls. The palace council did not act on tradition, it acted on fear. A crisis had reached a breaking point, one serious enough to threaten the monarchy's internal stability. Whispers turned into briefings, concerns became warnings, and suddenly, what had once been politely ignored became impossible to contain. The vote was not about the past, it was about preventing something far worse from erupting into public view. For weeks, the problem had no name, at least not one spoken aloud. It lived in sealed folders, in coded language exchanged behind closed doors, in glances that lingered too long during meetings that ended without resolution. Everyone sensed it. No one wanted to claim it. Because to define the crisis was to admit it could no longer be controlled. What had begun as a manageable internal complication had evolved into something volatile, something capable of shattering the illusion of unity the monarchy depended on to survive. Pressure did not arrive all at once. It crept in. Senior advisors began requesting urgent reviews. Trusted figures started asking the same questions in separate rooms, unaware that the answers no longer aligned. Royals who had once avoided involvement were quietly summoned, not for counsel but for consent. Each conversation added weight. Each delay multiplied risk. The longer the issue remained unresolved, the clearer it became that silence was no longer protection, it was exposure waiting to happen. The fear was not simply internal collapse, it was the public reckoning that would follow if the truth emerged without preparation. Advisors warned of headlines that could not be contained, of narratives that would right themselves once the press sensed blood in the water. Public trust, already fragile, would not survive another revelation handled too late. And in that realization, the council understood something chilling. Waiting was no longer neutral. Waiting was destructive. Sides began to form, not out of ideology but out of instinct. Loyalty pulled one way, survival pulled another. Some argued for restraint, clinging to the hope that time could still soften the blow. Others insisted that delay would only deepen the eventual damage, dragging more names into the fallout. The emotional toll was unmistakable, long-standing alliances strained. Private convictions clashed with public duty. And for those forced to choose, the cost was deeply personal. By the time the vote was called, the decision felt both sudden and overdue. Drastic action was no longer a threat, it was a necessity. The council was no longer asking what was fair, or even what was right. It was asking what would still be standing when the storm finally broke. In that moment, the monarchy chose containment over comfort, decisiveness over denial, knowing full well that the consequences would echo far beyond the chamber walls. At the center of it all stood one man forced to choose between loyalty, legacy, and survival. This was not a decision Charles wanted to make, but it was one he could no longer avoid. As king, every choice defines the crown. As a husband, every choice cuts deeper. In the days leading up to the vote, he was confronted with a reality no monarch is prepared for. Protecting the institution might require dismantling his own personal life, piece by piece. For Charles, the conflict did not arrive as a single moment of clarity. It unfolded slowly, painfully, through late-night briefings and private conversations that carried more weight than any public address ever could. He had waited his entire life to rule, believing perhaps naively that patience had earned him wisdom. Yet now, wisdom offered no comfort. The crown demanded certainty, while his conscience offered only hesitation. Every instinct as a husband urged restraint. Every responsibility as king demanded resolve. Warnings began arriving not as suggestions, but as facts. Trusted advisors spoke with unusual directness, abandoning softened language in favor of blunt truths. They did not question his feelings, they questioned the consequences of ignoring them. The crisis, they said, had outgrown sentiment. Containment was no longer theoretical, delay was now a measurable risk. And whether he approved or not, momentum was building toward action. The emotional cost of that realization was profound. Charles was not choosing between right and wrong, he was choosing between two losses. Loyalty to his wife carried the promise of internal fracture. Loyalty to the institution carried the certainty of personal sacrifice. Either way, something vital would be broken. In private moments, he returned to the same question again and again: how much of himself must a king surrender to keep the crown intact? What made the choice unbearable was discovering that neutrality was no longer an option. The council had reached its own threshold. Discussions were already shifting from whether to act to how. His silence, once interpreted as deliberation, was now seen as obstruction. The process would continue with or without his consent. And in that moment, Charles understood the cruel paradox of power. Refusing to choose was itself a decision, one that would strip him of control over the outcome. Consent, then, became a form of damage limitation. By stepping forward, he could shape the aftermath, soften the blow, preserve some semblance of dignity amid the fallout. By standing aside, he risked becoming irrelevant to a decision that would define his reign regardless. The realization did not bring peace, it brought resignation. A quiet acceptance that some lines, once crossed, can never be redrawn. As he prepared to give his approval, Charles understood that the consequences would be irreversible not just for the monarchy, but for his own life. Trust would fracture, relationships would change shape, and the man behind the crown would carry the weight long after the public moved on. He was not choosing victory, he was choosing survival, knowing full well what it would cost. And while Charles wrestled with conscience, the council itself was preparing for a confrontation that would divide the palace. The room was silent but charged. Every person seated at the table understood the gravity of what was about to happen. This was not a symbolic vote. This was a reckoning. As arguments clashed and alliances revealed themselves, it became clear that the monarchy was no longer united behind one vision. What followed was not diplomacy, it was a controlled implosion. The divide had been forming long before anyone dared to acknowledge it. On one side sat those who believed survival required decisive rupture, that the institution could not afford another compromise disguised as unity. On the other were voices urging restraint, warning that force would only fracture what little cohesion remained. These were not ideological disagreements. They were deeply personal calculations about legacy, loyalty, and blame. And once the discussion began, restraint evaporated. Arguments sharpened quickly. Some framed the issue as inevitability, claiming the title itself had become a liability, a symbol that invited scrutiny rather than respect. Others spoke in measured tones about precedent and protocol, carefully avoiding names while making their meaning unmistakably clear. Beneath the polished language ran something rawer: resentment over past decisions, unresolved grievances, and the quiet belief that this moment had been engineered, not stumbled into. As the debate intensified, emotional confrontations erupted through the veneer of formality. Accusations surfaced without ever being fully spoken, hanging in the air like unfinished sentences. Questions of influence, access, and credibility were raised with surgical precision. Each statement felt less like persuasion and more like indictment. It was no longer about whether action was necessary, it was about who would bear the consequences. The motion itself was crafted with chilling precision, no grand declarations, no moral flourishes, just a clean, procedural proposal to revert Camilla's status, framed as administrative correction rather than personal judgment. The language was deliberate, designed to sound neutral while carrying irreversible force. By the time it was read aloud, the outcome felt preordained, even to those who would vote against it. When the vote finally unfolded, there was no drama in the process, only tension in the pauses between names. Each response landed heavily, shifting the balance inch by inch. Those in favor avoided eye contact. Those opposed held it too long. And when the final count was confirmed, the silence that followed was louder than any outburst could have been. The decision had passed. Cleanly, officially, permanently. In the immediate aftermath, no one celebrated. There were no reassurances exchanged, no collective exhale of relief. Instead, the room filled with the awareness that something fundamental had changed. The council had crossed a line from which there would be no retreat. Unity, once presumed, was now performative at best. And every person present understood that the fallout would extend far beyond that table. But no one would feel the weight of that vote more than the woman at its center. There are moments that fracture a life into before and after. For Camilla, this was one of them. The news did not arrive with ceremony or compassion, it arrived as a quiet confirmation that everything she believed was secure had vanished. In that instant, the title she fought decades to claim slipped away, leaving behind something far colder than loss: humiliation. She was not summoned. There was no meeting staged to soften the impact. The message came indirectly, delivered with the careful neutrality reserved for decisions already finalized. The phrasing was procedural, almost clinical, as if emotion itself had been intentionally stripped from the words, and yet the meaning was unmistakable. The status she wore as proof of endurance, of survival through scandal and resistance, had been revoked. Not debated, not delayed, reverted. Behind closed doors, the response was raw. Shock gave way to disbelief, then to a silence heavy enough to feel physical. This was not simply about rank, it was about identity. For years, Camilla had endured scrutiny, judgment, and quiet contempt, telling herself that legitimacy would one day erase the suffering. Now, that promise collapsed in a single moment. The crown had not protected her, it had recalculated. The symbolism cut deepest. To be returned to Consort was not a technical adjustment, it was a rewriting of her place in history. It signaled that everything she had endured was no longer enough. that the sacrifices, the waiting, the public endurance of private pain could be undone by a vote she never witnessed. The realization carried a particular cruelty. She had not been defeated by public opinion, but by those closest to power. Feelings of betrayal followed quickly. Names surfaced in her thoughts, people she had trusted, people who had once assured her of unwavering support. Their silence now was deafening. No messages of reassurance arrived. No quiet defenses were offered. Allies vanished into protocol, retreating behind official distance. And in that isolation, Camilla understood the truth she had long avoided. Loyalty within the palace was conditional, and protection was never permanent. Disbelief lingered, not because the outcome was impossible, but because of how final it felt. There would be no appeal, no reversal cloaked in compromise. The decision had been engineered to stand. And with it came the slow, sinking awareness that her future within the monarchy was no longer defined, only uncertain. Visibility would be controlled. Influence diminished. Presence tolerated, but never again affirmed. What haunted her most was not the public reaction yet to come, but the private reckoning already unfolding. The sense that the institution she had defended, even at personal cost, had chosen itself without hesitation. In that choice, Camilla was no longer essential. She was expendable. And that realization reshaped everything she thought she understood about power, love, and survival inside the crown. And as Camilla retreated from view, the palace turned its attention to managing the fallout. A crown may be stripped in private, but its consequences echo loudly. Within hours, palace officials began crafting a narrative, one designed to minimize shock while controlling outrage. Every word mattered. Every omission was deliberate. This was not just damage control. It was an attempt to reshape public memory before it could rebel against the truth. The response was immediate and tightly managed. Emergency communications channels lit up as advisors scrambled to align language across departments that rarely agreed on tone, let alone substance. Statements were drafted, revised, and stripped of anything that suggested urgency or conflict. The goal was calm, not honesty. Calm. The palace needed the decision to feel administrative, inevitable, almost forgettable, even as nerves frayed behind closed doors. Language became the battlefield. Phrases like internal realignment and procedural clarification replaced words that hinted at loss or consequence. There was no mention of votes, no acknowledgement of dissent. Titles were discussed as abstractions, detached from people, as if status could be adjusted without human cost. The intent was clear: soften the blow before the public could feel it land. But even as drafts circulated, doubts surfaced about whether the strategy would hold. Fear of backlash hung over every discussion. Advisors warned that public patience was thinner than ever, that the monarchy no longer benefited from unquestioned deference. One misstep, one poorly chosen phrase, could ignite a media storm impossible to contain. Some urged transparency, arguing that half-truths would only invite speculation. Others pushed back hard, insisting that revealing too much would legitimize criticism and embolden opposition. The divide was sharp and unresolved. As debates dragged on, signs of leakage began to appear. Journalists started asking unusually precise questions. Commentators hinted at developments not yet announced. Someone, somewhere, was talking. And with each whisper that escaped containment, anxiety intensified. The palace was no longer shaping the story alone, it was racing it. Every delay increased the risk that the narrative would be defined externally, stripped of the careful framing being constructed in panic. Internal disagreements grew louder. Some officials believed the public could accept the decision if it was explained with clarity and confidence. Others feared that no explanation would suffice, that the symbolism alone would trigger outrage regardless of wording. Trust in the communications strategy began to erode, replaced by a grim understanding that the institution was reacting, not leading. Control, once assumed, now felt fragile. By the time the final statement neared release, confidence had given way to apprehension. The language was polished, the tone measured, but beneath the surface lay the awareness that the explanation was already cracking. Too many voices had been silenced, too many questions left unanswered, and once the public sensed that gap, it would fill it with its own conclusions far harsher than anything the palace had prepared. Because no matter how carefully the palace spoke, the public reaction was already forming, and it was anything but calm. Once the decision became known internally, the royal family began to split along emotional fault lines. Some saw justice, others saw cruelty. Old wounds reopened, alliances shifted, and silence became its own form of protest. This wasn't just about Camilla, it was about power, succession, and who truly controls the monarchy's future. Reactions surfaced in fragments, carried through private channels and guarded conversations. A few senior royals expressed quiet approval, framing the outcome as long overdue a necessary correction to protect credibility. They spoke of responsibility, of sacrifice for the greater good, and of the crown's obligation to endure even when individuals must not. Yet their approval was rarely vocal. It came in nods, in brief affirmations, in an unmistakable sense of relief that someone else had finally drawn the line. Others responded with something closer to grief. Not all opposition was loud. In fact, much of it took the form of absence, missed calls, delayed responses, a sudden reluctance to be seen endorsing anything at all. This was resistance by withdrawal. A refusal to legitimize a decision they believed crossed an invisible boundary. For them, the move felt less like governance and more like punishment, delivered without mercy and justified after the fact. Family dynamics strained under the weight of it all. Long-standing tensions, carefully managed for years, resurfaced with startling clarity. Conversations became guarded. Trust thinned. Some relationships cooled abruptly, not because of disagreement alone, but because of what the decision implied, that safety within the institution was conditional, and permanence an illusion. The emotional toll rippled outward, touching marriages, sibling bonds, and generational loyalties that had once seemed untouchable. Beneath these reactions lurked a deeper fear: precedent. If a title could be stripped this decisively, what else could be reconsidered? What protections truly existed for those who fell out of favor? The question unsettled even those who supported the outcome. Power, once exercised so openly, rarely stops at a single target. And in that realization, unease spread quietly through corridors where confidence had once reigned. Behind the scenes, dormant power struggles began to re-emerge. Influence was reassessed, positions recalculated. Some saw opportunity in the instability, believing the decision had weakened rivals and clarified lines of authority. Others worried it had exposed fractures that could no longer be concealed. Succession, once a distant conversation, crept closer into the present, reshaped by the knowledge that control could shift swiftly and without warning. What made the moment explosive was not disagreement, but recognition. The family understood that something fundamental had changed. The monarchy had chosen decisiveness over cohesion, authority over consensus. And while the immediate crisis appeared contained, the emotional aftershocks suggested otherwise. This was not resolution, it was ignition. And as the dust settled, one haunting question remained: what does this decision mean for the future of the crown itself? This was never just about a title. It was about control, survival, and the quiet rewriting of royal history in real time. By stripping Camilla of her queen title, the monarchy crossed a line it can never uncross. What was once unthinkable is now precedent, and the crown, though still worn, may never feel as secure again. In the days that followed, the true weight of the council's decision began to surface not in public statements, but in the long shadows it cast across the institution. Authority, once implied by continuity and tradition, now carried a sharper edge. The message was unmistakable: Legitimacy is no longer permanent, it is conditional. And that shift, subtle as it may appear, alters the balance of power in ways no official briefing could ever fully contain. Going forward, royal authority will no longer rest solely on lineage or endurance. It will rest on alignment, on favor, on remaining useful to an institution increasingly willing to act decisively when threatened. That reality reshapes the monarchy from a symbol of stability into an active force of enforcement. The crown has shown it can correct itself, but in doing so, it has revealed how far it is willing to go. The psychological impact of that revelation will linger, especially for those who may one day stand beside the throne. Future consorts will inherit not just privilege, but anxiety. Every step will be measured, every miscalculation magnified. The role, once framed as ceremonial endurance, now comes with an unspoken warning. Acceptance can be revoked, and with that knowledge, loyalty may shift from devotion to self-preservation. For Charles, this moment will define his reign in ways no coronation ever could. He may be remembered as a king who chose action over sentiment, stability over unity, or as the monarch who normalized intervention where restraint once ruled. Either way, his legacy has been irrevocably altered. The decision will follow him, resurfacing whenever questions of authority, compassion, or control arise. It will not fade with time, it will sharpen. Camilla's place in history, meanwhile, remains unresolved. Stripped of title but not of consequence, she exists now in a space between acknowledgement and erasure. Her story will be debated, reframed, and contested long after the immediate fallout subsides. Was she a casualty of necessity, or a symbol of overreach? The answer will depend on who tells the story and who is still allowed to. And beneath all of it lies a final, unsettling truth. If the crown can be taken away once, it can happen again. The decision has cracked open a door that cannot be closed, inviting speculation not just about what happened, but about what comes next. Because power, once exercised this openly, rarely stops where it began. Because in a monarchy where crowns can be taken away, no title, no matter how powerful, is ever truly safe again. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.